Hola, and welcome to another episode of F1 Brake Check. Today's episode will feature a history of the Spanish Grand Prix, a deep dive into the MGU-K. Corey will once again attempt to scramble my gray matter with his trivia questions and Stump the Pundit, and we'll break down the news from Spain and last week's Grand Prix and get you ready for round two of the triple header from Austria. So sit back with a brat and a beer. F1 Brake Check is away.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
We are back with F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick, and with me, as always, is my pundit for life, Corey Broom. Corey, how are you doing this week, sir?
Really well. It's turning out to be a pretty good week so far. Had a great weekend. Watched the race. The race was just phenomenal. I can't wait to start talking about it. But other than that, it was a very busy but very good week. How about you?
Very much the same. Quiet but entertaining weekend. We got a great race from Spain. Things are going well. All right, so let's jump into our history lesson. One of the oldest races in the history of motorsport, the Spanish Grand Prix has a legacy that stretches back over a century. Its evolution reflects the broader changes and advancements within the world of motor racing, making it a key event in the annual calendar. The origins of the Grand Prix can be traced back to 1913 when the first race took place near Madrid. The early races were held on public roads and varied circuits, reflecting the experimental nature of motor racing in its infancy. In the years leading up to World War II, the Spanish Grand Prix began to gain prominence. The race was held intermittently, often at street circuits, showcasing the dramatic and perilous nature of early Grand Prix racing. The circuit at Les Arts, in particular, was renowned for its challenging layout, which tested the skill and bravery of drivers. After a hiatus during the war years, the Spanish Grand Prix returned in 1951 as part of the Formula One World Championship. The race was held at the Pedregal circuit in Barcelona. This marked Spain's official entry into the burgeoning world of Formula One. The 1951 race was won by the legendary Juan Manuel Fangio. After a tragic accident in 1954, the Pedregal circuit was deemed too dangerous, leading it to being dropped as an F1 event. In the 1960s, the Spanish Grand Prix found a more stable footing with alternating venues. The race was held at the Yarma circuit near Madrid and the Montjuic circuit in Barcelona. Yarma, a tight and twisty circuit, often produced dramatic racing. Montjuic, on the other hand, was a picturesque street circuit, offering a stark contrast with its high speed and stunning views of the city. The dual venue approach continued into the 1970s with notable races such as the 1971 event at Montjuic, where Jackie Stewart, in a Tyrrell, triumphed over the much more powerful Ferraris. However, Montjuic's tenure as a Grand Prix venue ended in 1975 following the tragic fatal accident involving Rolf Stolman. This incident led to increased scrutiny on circuit safety, prompting the permanent move to Yarma. The late 1970s and early 1980s saw the Spanish Grand Prix become a fixture at Yarma. During this period, iconic drivers such as Niki Lauda, Mario Andretti, and Gilles Villeneuve stamped their names in the history books with their heroics at the circuit. The 1981 race is particularly memorable because of Gilles Villeneuve's masterful defensive driving, securing a narrow victory despite intense pressure from behind. However, Yarma's facility and layout eventually became outdated compared to modern circuits. As a result, the Spanish Grand Prix was dropped from the calendar after 1981, and Spain did not host a race again until 1986 with a move to the new Jerez circuit. Jerez de la Frontera, located in southern Spain, provided a new and modern venue for the Spanish Grand Prix. The circuit quickly became known for its challenging layout and enthusiastic crowds. One of the most memorable races at Jerez occurred in 1986 with Ayrton Senna and Nigel Mansell finishing just 0.014 seconds apart, one of the closest finishes in Formula One history. Despite its initial success, Jerez faced logistical challenges, leading to the decision to move the race to the newly built Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya in 1991. The circuit, located near Barcelona, has since become the permanent home of the Spanish Grand Prix. The Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya is a modern facility that has played a crucial role in the evolution of Formula One. Its mix of high-speed straights and flowing corners makes it a favorite among drivers and teams and is used extensively as a testing venue during the off-season. The 1990s and 2000s saw several dramatic races at the circuit. Michael Schumacher won 6 times at the circuit during his time in F1. The 1996 race in particular stands out as a testament to Schumacher's skill as he dominated the wet conditions to secure his first win as a Ferrari driver. In recent years, the Spanish Grand Prix has continued to deliver exciting and unpredictable races. The 2012 race is notable for Pastor Maldonado's stunning victory, marking the first and only win of his career. The rise of Spanish drivers such as Fernando Alonso and Carlos Sainz Jr. has further fueled local interest in the Grand Prix. Alonso's victories in 2006 and 2013 at the Spanish Grand Prix were celebrated feverishly by the home crowd, cementing his statue as a national hero. Sainz, following in his father's footsteps, has also shown great promise, consistently performing well at his home race. The Spanish Grand Prix has a rich history. From its early days on public roads to its current status as the premier event on the Formula One calendar. As the sport continues to grow and change, the Spanish Grand Prix remains a cornerstone, celebrating the past while looking forward to the future.
The Spanish track is one of my favorites. It's such a great track. So many DRS zones. It's just so fun to watch.
It's a lot of fun. Most of the drivers, it's definitely one of their favorite tracks.
So on to the tech corner.
A couple weeks ago, we took a very deep multi-week dive into the past and present state of Formula One engines that later became known as power units. A lot of people have asked me, you talked about the various hybrid parts of the power unit, but how do they actually work? And so this week, we are going to take and do a deep dive into one of those elements, the MGU-K, which stands for Motor Generation Unit Kinetic. Sometimes it's also referred to as the KERS system, which stands for Kinetic Energy Recovery System. I'm going to refer to it as a KERS for the remainder of our discussion.
Listening to the races, listening to all the commentators, I hear KERS a lot, or I hear Energy Recovery System. Can you outline exactly what does that mean when they say that?
The KERS system is a method by which the cars are able to capture energy under braking. When the cars start to brake, the brakes generate a ton of heat. And normally, the faster the cars go, the more braking force is required to slow the car down for the corners. And the more braking that is needed, the larger the brakes became, the larger the braking systems became, the more heat that was produced. And as the brakes evolved from the original drums to discs, as the materials evolved from the original metal iron brake discs to the carbon ceramic brake discs, they just generated more and more heat. So the KERS system is actually a way of, instead of losing all of that energy of slowing the car down into heat, it allows the teams to be able to recover that energy, store that energy, and then use that energy later on during the course of a lap.
So is this part of the whole net zero by 2026? Is that part of that effort?
Yes, absolutely. Because by using these energy recovery systems, the internal combustion engine part of the power unit, or the ICE part of the unit, they're able to make them much smaller and much more efficient, while at the same time still retaining the mind-boggling performance that F1 is known for.
What's the history of the recovery systems? How did they come to be?
The energy recovery systems were first formalized into the rules by the FIA with the 2009 regulations. Now, there were several teams that actually started experimenting with a KERS type system before that, and I couldn't find who had it first. But I want to say, from my own memory, it was either Williams or Renault started playing around with a kinetic energy recovery system, or KERS, as early as, I want to say it was, now don't quote me on this, but from my own memory, I want to say it was probably as early as 2005, 2006, they started playing around with these systems and developing them. And then they became part of the rule set for 2009. So in 2008, ahead of the rule change, Ferrari, Renault, BMW, and Williams, I believe it was, there was 4 teams started experimenting with new energy recovery systems.
So you've talked a little bit about what this does and very high level as far as how it does the energy recovery, but can you go into a little bit more detail?
Sure. So basically, the way the whole system works is there is a motor that is attached to the front of the internal combustion engine that is attached directly to the crankshaft and driveline of the internal combustion engine. Then there are a series of gears that are attached to the. You have to think of the way a Formula One car is set up is you have the motor, then you have the transmission, and then you have the differential. And the differential is usually built in as part of the transmission casing itself. So it's really basically all one unit. And then the differential takes and basically splits all of the power that comes off of the crankshaft through the transmission into the differential, and the differential splits the power into 2 half shafts that then take and extend out from the differential part of the transmission out to the wheels. And so inside of the differential, there are a set of gears in there that are constantly turning. So when a F1 car goes to brake now, it actually has these flywheels that are attached to the half shafts. So in a modern EV, a lot of the cars actually have a system, what they call a one pedal drive, where you take your foot off of the gas and the energy recovery systems that are built into the EVs actually will start slowing the car down automatically for you. Same system is built into an F1 car. So when a driver goes to brake, in addition to the braking force from the carbon ceramic brakes, these flywheels will also start to apply braking energy to the car. So this has actually allowed the cars to become much more efficient in the use of the brakes, and it has actually allowed the brakes in the rear to actually be reduced in size. So they actually have a smaller unsprung weight at the corners for the rear brakes. Now, as those flywheels turn, it takes that energy that is recovered from the braking force and it sends it into the motor unit at the front of the internal combustion engine. And that motor, as it turns, is amplifying the energy that's being sent from the flywheels, and it stores that energy into the battery. Once that energy is stored into the battery, the driver can then take and use at his discretion via a button on the steering wheel. He can use that energy now under acceleration to actually take and basically reverse the motor that's at the front of the internal combustion engine, which then takes and helps spin the crankshaft faster, which then increases the acceleration coming out of a corner. But he can also use it as a defensive mechanism. So say a driver's going down and there's another driver behind him that has DRS, he can use the energy recovery system to deploy that extra power to the motor in order to defend his position.
Yeah, you hear that the commentators talk about that all the time. Yeah.
Yes. So like when you hear the commentators talking about harvesting, that's when the driver under braking is creating power from the braking force and using that to store in the batteries. We do have to talk about the differences between the way that they use it in a qualifying lap and the way that they use it during the race. Over the course of a qualifying lap, you will hear the engineers actually over the radios will remind the driver, drain the battery, use every bit of the energy recovery system power that you can. During a qualifying lap, the driver will take and judiciously use the energy that he has stored in the battery for acceleration and for increasing his top speed. And this can be used throughout the course of a lap. And in qualifying, they will use every bit of the energy from the energy recovery system. Now, during the race, because there are limits on the amount of energy that they can use because the battery storage is limited in its size. So the batteries can only hold so much energy, and that's mandated by the rules. Over the course of a lap, as the battery is recharged and depleted, it will depend upon when the driver decides to deploy it and when he decides to harvest and save that energy. And so, like we were just saying, when the commentators talk about harvesting the energy, that's what they're doing, is they're basically taking all of the energy that they are able to generate when they're braking. They will store it in the battery and not use it right away. When they need a little extra boost, or they want to hang on to it to defend their position or to overtake someone, that's when they will actually deploy that energy and deplete the battery. During the course of a race, until you get into the later stages, they will never take and try to completely deplete the battery during the race, like I said, except for in like the late stages.
Yeah.
So that's your deep dive into the KERS system that is used by the teams in Formula One. So that's everything that you wanted to know about the KERS system, but were afraid to ask. All right, let's move on to Stump the Pundit. So Corey's going to take and try to twist up my noodle with a series of trivia questions. So Corey, what have you got for me this week?
All right, just a few trivia questions today. Looking at our race winners, who has the biggest race winning margin?
Are we talking about just this year, or are we talking about
all time?
All time. Oh, wow, that's a good one. This is one that I have absolutely no idea.
There's two different ones. So there's just by pure lap count. Jackie Stewart and Damon Hill both took victory over 2 laps.
Wow.
In races. And then pure race time, Sterling Moss won it by over 5 minutes. So when we talk about last year, when we were talking about how Verstappen was winning for over 30 seconds and we're all aghast, we couldn't believe how much there's been others. So
yeah, here's Sterling Moss going, hold my beer.
Yeah, exactly. Who holds the most consecutive retirements in a row? And this is all time.
Part of me wants to say that it was probably somebody like the drivers who for Pacific back in the early 90s, but there was a lot of times those cars didn't even qualify, so they technically couldn't have retired because it was so rare for them to actually qualify for the races. I don't know. That's a good one. I don't know. Lay it on me.
Andre de Cesaris.
Mm-hmm.
And he went 22 races without completing a race.
Wow. That is just a
yeah. So Leclerc, whenever you're saying I have such bad luck,
yeah. This is another case of somebody going, hold my beer. You know,
exactly.
I can remember De Cesaris during the years when he was racing. You know, I can remember this time at Jordan, and I remember there was a number of times, and that probably is what restarted the streak, was when he was driving for Jordan back in the very early 90s, back in 91, 92.
Who holds the biggest starting grid penalty? Or what team?
That would be, I'm going to go with Fernando Alonso when he was driving for his second stint at McLaren when they were running Honda Power. So that would have been probably 2012, 2013, somewhere in there.
Close. So it was 2015, and you were right about the Honda parts, but It's actually Jenson Button at the 2015 Mexican Grand Prix. Now, do you remember how many grid places he dropped?
I want to say it was somewhere in the ball. I want to say it was like 15 grid places.
70.
70.
0. There's a point where it just becomes ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
that was about 50 over ridiculous.
Yes. All right, so let's get into all the action from this last weekend. We'll talk about the news and rumors, and we'll get you ready for next week's part 2 of the first triple header of the season from the Austrian Grand Prix. First up, Corey, I'm sure that you've heard about this, that apparently somebody sent some anonymous emails, and I never got the news articles that I read, I never got a clear-cut idea of who these emails were sent to. Were they sent to the team?
I thought it was sent to Toto and a couple others. Yeah.
For those who didn't know, a bunch of emails were sent anonymously claiming that Hamilton was being deliberately sabotaged by his own team at Mercedes. Now that he's moving on to Ferrari, he was being intentionally sabotaged by the team in order to elevate Russell. And the team got the police involved, which, okay, first of all, that was just freaking ridiculous because even the police were like,
okay,
even if it's true, it's not a crime being committed. If the team wants to sabotage their own driver, as long as they're not putting his safety in jeopardy, then by all means. To Hamilton's credit, he basically just said, it's all BS. Who cares? Why is this even news? But it was news, so we got to talk about it. So your thoughts?
Yeah, same thing. I think it's kind of a stupid deal because even if that were the case, then teams have been doing that from day one.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
You're leaving to go somewhere else. Why am I going to put all my energy into you when I have this other driver who's not leaving?
Yes.
It makes no sense from a financial aspect. We saw the same thing with Vettel. We see that same thing with every single driver that leaves.
Yes.
Voluntarily or not. With one exception. I don't see that with Sainz. I don't see Ferrari treating Sainz that way. But almost everybody else I have.
Well, okay, so two things there. One, you're right. We have not seen that with Sainz because Fred Vassar is a stand-up guy, and he will make sure that Sainz gets equal footing right up until the day that he walks out the door and goes to his next team. But the second thing, you're right. Like you said, why am I going to put all of my effort into, unless they're already leading the world championship, why am I going to put all of my effort into someone who's already got one foot out the door? Exactly. But at the same time, Formula One is a culture of secrets because all of the teams are looking for every little tiny edge that they can get. There are so many things that are going on with the cars that the drivers may not know all the technical details of it, but they know enough about it that the teams don't want them to take those items that they might be developing or that they may have developed that nobody else knows about because it's something hidden in one of the systems, but they're trying to eke out that little tiny thousandth of a second advantage over their rivals. They don't want the drivers being able to take that information with them to go to another team.
This is one that I hadn't heard about, is the McLaren hospitality fire.
I'm surprised that you didn't hear about this, but so basically what happened was on Sunday, shortly before the Grand Prix, there was a fire that broke out in the McLaren hospitality. You can't call it a tent anymore because they have gone so far beyond tents, but the hospitality suite. So in the McLaren hospitality suite, a fire broke out. They were very quick to say that it was not an electrical fire, that it probably started in the kitchen, and it required the evacuation of all of the McLaren personnel and their guests from the suite. And it required several of the track fire personnel, as well as a number of volunteer firefighters from Barcelona area to help put out the fire. And at one point, Pirelli was on one side, and I forgot who was on the other side because the smoke had become so bad that they actually had to evacuate both of those hospitality suites as well. So Fortunately, there was only one McLaren personnel who still hasn't been mentioned. So I'm guessing it was probably somebody in the kitchen staff was hospitalized, but they didn't have any serious injuries or anything, and they were released later that day. And there was also two of the firefighters were treated for smoke inhalation and released the same day. This has led to, with this weekend's race at Austria, that they're not going to have the use of their hospitality suite this weekend. So they're basically going to be going old school, where they're basically going to be doing it probably out of a series of tents, and the catering who prepares all the food and everything for the team on a given race weekend will be working out of the back of the garage. But thankfully nobody was seriously hurt, and they'll be able to take and get it fixed pretty quickly.
Talking about Max's trying to run the old car to see what the problems are.
Basically, before the race in Spain, the Red Bull team actually had Max Verstappen running the 2022 spec RB18 around Imola. And what he was trying to do is, because this year's car really does not handle going over the curbs and large bumps as well as it did with last year's car and the 2022 car. In order to figure out what the car needs in order to be more compliant over these bumps and over the curbs and things like that, the team decided to pull out the 2022 spec car and have Max go around Imola while the race at Imola was still fairly fresh in Max's mind, so that way he can compare the 2022 car with the 2024 car, so that he can take and they can start working on trying to figure out how to better set up the car to make it more raceable in its current iteration.
On to Briatore's return.
Yep. So this was another item that came out over the course of the race this last weekend in Spain. I
did see this one.
Yeah, Alpine announced that Flavio Briatore, who, as you might recall from our discussion about the biggest cheater in the history of Formula One, a man who received a lifetime ban from Formula One that was later overturned by a court, is going to be returning as a special consultant for the Alpine team, which used to be Renault, which is the team that Briatore ran for many, many years and won multiple world championships with. And so there are a lot of people, including the esteemed 96 world champion Damon Hill, all said this is unacceptable. We don't need this guy back in Formula One. And I agree with him. Knowing the history of Briatore and all of the things that he's done, I don't think that this should be allowed. I can't even believe that Alpine is even considering doing this.
Desperate times, desperate measures. I don't agree with it at all.
I don't agree with it. I really would highly doubt it that somebody in the FIA or in the higher levels of Formula One are not trying to figure out some way to block this from happening.
Right.
Not a lot of solid news this week on the driver carousel, but we had lots of rumors.
Yeah.
So the first one is that apparently Williams is already working on focusing on plan B. They think that Sainz is going to turn them down. Every single team that has an open seat has offered a contract to Carlos Sainz. First thought, we're hopeful that maybe he would come there to partner with Albon, but now they're saying that no, we're pretty sure that he's going to turn us down because we can't offer him as competitive machinery as what some of the other teams can offer him, or the potential for the future with competitive machinery. So now they're working on plan B, which a lot of people are saying they are now focused on Valtteri Bottas and trying to get him to return to his former team.
Home.
Bring him on home. I'm all for it. I think that the pairing of Albon and Bottas would be phenomenal.
Couldn't agree more. Well, you know, I love Bottas. I just think he is just phenomenal. And to see him going back to Williams and to have his knowledge base helping the engineers, I think it's a phenomenal move if that's actually a true occurrence or a true rumor. I have a rumor for you. I don't know if you've heard this one or not.
Nope.
Logan Sargent going to IndyCar.
Really?
That's a complete rumor.
I think that would be phenomenal.
Yeah.
Because I think that Logan he's improving, but I don't think he's going to improve enough between now and the end of the season to warrant him staying in Formula One. I do believe that he deserves a racing seat someplace.
I have another rumor for you.
Okay.
They're going to cancel Checo's contract.
Well, as we've talked about a number of times on here, that every Formula One contract has escape clauses in it, both for the team and for the driver. But the thing is, though, is that it's like, I can't help but think that why would the team lock him up? It'd be one thing.
2 years.
Yeah, for a 2-year extension, just to turn around and dump him before that extension can even take place. And then they're going to have to pay. I guarantee you that there is financial considerations.
Oh, no doubt.
That they're going to have to buy him out in order to be able to cancel that contract. Why would they do that? Cancel out a contract before it's even started.
Again, it's all rumor.
I don't believe that one for a second. I don't believe it at all. But now another rumor that has started swirling around just today was a statement that came from Helmut about Red Bull, particularly the junior team, that now that they've locked up Yuki Tsunoda on a contract extension, I'm paraphrasing here, but Helmut Marko basically came out and said, not so many words, Ricciardo was hired with the hopes that he would regain form and he could be promoted to Red Bull as Max's teammate once again. Now that Checo's been locked up, Ricciardo is on his way out the door to make room for Liam Lawson, which we've speculated before in the last couple of weeks. Yeah. But it's now, that's probably about the clearest sign so far to say that, yes, Liam Lawson will be in the second Racing Bull come next season. Your thoughts?
I hope so. Again, I like Danny Rick. I think he's a personable guy, but just like Steiner, he's a great personality. He sucked as a team principal. He just did. He sucked as his team principal.
He did.
Again, funny to watch, funny to listen to. Danny Rick, same thing. Funny to listen to, great personality, but he can't drive. His racing days in F1 have been over, really, since last year, let's be honest. Yeah. We all kept hoping that maybe he could just get over it. It's a mental block or something like that. And we did see brilliance from him in certain races. He looked like the old Danny, but he just cannot get there. Anybody that's been a fan of F1, even for 6 months, knows it's a cutthroat environment. If you don't make it, you're gone. There's somebody literally right behind you that wants your seat. Why have Danny in there? That, again, he's a little bit on the older side. Why have somebody that's an aging driver in your car when you could have somebody that's brand new, has that drive really to get in there and be the first choice?
Yeah.
So those are my thoughts. I wholeheartedly agree that Danny needs to get out of that seat and they need to let go and let Liam have a shot at that.
All right. So now it's time for us to recap all the action from this past weekend. First of all, let's talk about practice. So we've talked about this a number of times before, that it's always really kind of hard to get a handle on how the teams are going to look until we get to FP3. But FP1 and FP2 were super entertaining this last weekend in the fact that we had different drivers at the top of the time charts, all three practice sessions, and not once was it a Red Bull driver at the top of the speed charts at the end of free practices. So I thought that was just super, super interesting. And it made for a very fun start to the weekend to begin with. So we had Lando took the top of the charts on Friday in FP1, Lewis at the top of the speed charts on FP2. And then we had Carlos Sainz with his Ferrari at the top on 3.
I was really hoping that my predictions were going to hold true.
It was looking very much that way.
Yeah.
It was looking very much that way after the practices. We get into qualifying and we have just an absolutely barnstorming, amazing qualifying. Truly. With Lando Norris coming out on top with an absolutely spot on perfect lap by a tenth of a second over Max Verstappen, and came in with just an absolutely brilliant drive to take pole position. Alpine was going to be anything other than a cellar dweller for the remainder of the season. Right. And the fact that they have righted the ship in such dramatic fashion, or at least they haven't completely righted it, but they're definitely moving in that right direction, and they're doing it with consistency.
Exactly.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about the race. So absolutely brilliant from the start. So Lando takes a phenomenal pole, and then we have the two Mercedes on the second row, which is another huge surprise of how much better the Mercedes have been looking. And so we get the start. Lando kind of botches the start a little bit, and he is so focused in trying to keep Max behind him because he botched the start. And to the point where Max is actually driving off into hangs two wheels off into the grass. And because of this, George Russell takes complete advantage of Lando focusing on Max, that he sweeps around both of them going into turn 1 and takes the lead of the race.
Oh, that overtake of two cars. How impressive was that overtime? I keep replaying it in my mind. It was just so awesome to watch.
It was. It really was. It goes to show two things. It goes to show, one, the maturation of Russell, and it shows just how much better the Mercedes. I think we've definitely seen that, at least this weekend, they did not take a step back. And in fact, they may have even taken another step forward this weekend. And then we had the Ferrari pair locked out the third row. Both showed quite a bit of speed this weekend. I think it was just a matter of the car was just a little bit off the top runners this weekend. At one point, you had Sainz went off the road. The stewards took a look at it and said, hey, did he gain an unfair advantage? Which, to their credit this time, they said, no, he didn't, and let him keep the place. When you look at it, by the time he went off the track, he had already passed Leclerc. He was already well past Leclerc.
Right.
So he had already rightfully earned that spot anyway. In order to not cause an accident by running into his teammate, he ran just a little bit wide, went off the track just a little bit. We had Oscar, who qualified 10th. They had some mechanical issues with the car during Q3, so he was never actually able to set a time in Q3. But then because of Sergio Perez's grid penalty from the previous race, Checo qualified 8th, but then got 3 grid place penalty and was relegated to 11th. So that elevated Oscar to 9th. And then he took, at one point, he was running, I think, as high as 3rd. And then during the course of the pit stops, he got dropped back a little bit, but ends up bringing the car home in 7th. All things considered, a really, really strong weekend for Oscar as well. Checo qualified 8th, took the grid penalty, got dropped to 11th, but then was able to claw his way back up to that 8th position at the end of the race. Got some well-needed points for the weekend. Like we were talking just a few minutes ago about how well the Alpines looked and got into Q3, and they both took points this weekend by getting both cars into the top 10.
They need desperately.
Yeah, desperately needed points for the Alpine team. So Nico Hulkenberg didn't have the greatest qualifying. He seems to love finishing in that 11th spot. Now, unfortunately, that 11th spot is just one spot out of the points.
Right.
You know, you would like to see him doing a little bit better and getting some more points.
Just one place. Yes.
We talked a little bit about the disastrous weekend that the Racing Bulls had.
Yeah.
Ricardo ends up coming home in 15th, and poor Yuki winds up a lap down all the way back in 19th place.
He had a bad pit stop, though, at one point, right?
Yeah, he did. At one point, he had just an absolutely disastrous pit stop. And then also Alonso, who also they had a problem with the rear wheel nut because he had a really good qualifying, but ends up having to claw his way back all the way back up to 12th place and outside the points and a lap down to boot. Just not a great weekend for Aston Martin in general. Although, you know, Stroll continues to, he's not setting the world on fire, but at least he's showing a little more consistency and a lot more maturity. So we wound up with our race winners. Despite the efforts of McLaren, the overcut at Barcelona is tremendous. And so they left Lando out longer. They were planning on doing like an overcut / undercut and try and get him into the lead. And they were off by just a little tiny bit. So Lando looked amazingly strong all weekend. Max wins the race after his brilliant pass of George Russell later on lap 2. The only time he relinquished the lead was during the rounds of pit stops. After the cycling of the pit stops, he was back out in front. So he takes the top step of the podium. Lando had another tremendous race. And had he had another couple of laps, I think he would have been right on Max's tail again, because he ends up finishing only 2.2 seconds behind Max. And then we had a really surprising third place for Hamilton. That was really exciting to see. The other thing that we have to talk about is that now Lando has taken over second place in the Drivers' Championship. Now, he's still got a pretty big gap to pick up over Max, but he's now second place in the championship. And he's actually even stated that he thinks that because McLaren is firing on all cylinders, the car seems to be every bit the match for the Red Bull, that he thinks that he can really take the title fight to Max for the remainder of the season. Your thoughts?
I have no doubt that he can. The last several laps, he was coming very close. If he would have had maybe another 10 laps to go, he could have caught him. Now, it's going to be very interesting the remaining of the year. If McLaren can keep up with their current pace and not degrade, I think we have a really tight race for the championship.
Oh, I do. I absolutely do.
It's going to be a fun year.
Yeah. So shall we go ahead and preview this weekend's action from the Austria ring in Austria?
Yep. Sounds good.
All right. So first question is who do you think is going to go well this weekend?
I think it's going to be the main three. So I think it's going to be McLaren, Red Bull, and I'll go ahead and say Mercedes. I think those are going to be our top three.
All right. Well, I'm going to kind of agree with you, although I think that Ferrari are also going to have a pretty good weekend. The Red Bull Ring at Austria is a very high-speed track that I think that the Ferraris, with their power, are going to be right there in the mix as well. And it's just a matter of who nails the practice programs right, go into qualifying strong, and who's going to nail the strategy this weekend. So who's going to be your surprise this weekend?
I think that Racing Bulls is going to be my surprise.
You and I are just there, right there. I was thinking the exact same thing. As I think we're going to see, especially because Racing Bulls, being the Red Bull's junior team, this is the home race for the Red Bull, and it's also a home race for Racing Bulls. So I think that we're definitely going to see Racing Bulls make a huge bounce back after the disaster of last weekend. So I think that they're going to be a big surprise this weekend, and they're going to be much closer to the top of the time sheets than they were last weekend.
Right.
Next question is, who do you think is going to falter this weekend? Who do you think is going to have a bad weekend?
Unfortunately, I'm going to say it's going to be Sauber. It's going to be the big one. I think Haas will probably struggle a little bit this weekend as well.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with you on the Sauber front, because I just think that they've made too many mistakes in the early part of the year. And it's like the old saying, mistakes bring on more mistakes, which bring on more mistakes and bring on more mistakes. Yeah. And although they've looked better the last couple of weeks, they're still struggling mightily. All right. So the last question is who's your podium this weekend?
I'll go with Max, Lando Norris. And even though I didn't pick them to be the top, I'll go ahead and say Leclerc. So those will be my three.
Well, I'm going to switch it up just a little bit, because I got to sneak it, because I think that they're due. Yeah. That I'm going to go I'm going to switch it up on you for the first two. That I'm going to go. It's going to be Lando and then Max.
Nice.
For first and second. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually going to say that but I think you're right that despite Mercedes having the car being much better and them having a really strong weekend, I'm going to actually go with Sainz this weekend as the third place finisher.
Nice. All right. I like it.
I'm about talked out. How about you?
I think we're ready, man.
Okay, then. So that is all the time we have this week. But come back next week when we'll break down the history of the Austrian Grand Prix and all the action from the 2024 weekend. We'll also have another deep dive into the technology of Formula One. Corey will have another round of trivia for us and more. So come back next week for more action. So until then, he's Corey. I'm Scott. We're the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.